We are Green Energy Consumers Alliance sponsoring this event. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We are in our 42nd year as an organization. Our mission is to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. And tonight's topic is right at the heart of what our mission is all about. Presenters tonight. I am Larry Cretion. I'm the Executive Director of Green Energy Consumers Alliance. With me is Benny Meshulam, who's the Senior Advisor for Climate and Energy for the Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division of Attorney General Campbell's office. And with us is Michael Judge, Undersecretary of Energy for the Massachusetts Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Also, Reverend Mariama White-Hammond is the Chief of the Environment for the Energy and Open Space Cabinet for the City of Boston. And with us is Jeremiah Battle, a Senior Attorney with the National Consumer Law Center. And from Green Roots, we have Devin McCoy and Patricia Ospina. And they'll all be talking in a few minutes. I want to just get started a little bit explaining what we're here to talk about. We're here to solve a problem with your help. Third-party suppliers are harming Massachusetts consumers. That's been pretty well documented by the Attorney General's office, the Department of Public Utilities, the City of Boston, other municipalities around the state, and advocates like Green Energy Consumers Alliance, Green Roots, National Consumer Law Center. We've received hundreds of complaints about the practices of third-party suppliers. There have been massive consumer losses over time, over $500 million since 2015. That's well documented by, I think it's 4 reports from the Attorney General's office that Benny will be talking about. That's essentially a major transfer of wealth from consumers in Massachusetts to, I suppose, the shareholders of these electric suppliers from around the country. Those practices that they undertake are often aggressive and deceptive. They make misleading promises about savings and clean energy. And worse yet, they target low-income communities, communities of color, non-native English speakers, people with disabilities, seniors, and students. We consider all that to be predatory. And they often greenwash, which means they claim benefits to the climate that just don't add up. They're not really there. Many suppliers purchase cheap out-of-state energy credits that don't benefit the Commonwealth or even the planet, and their renewable energy content is questionable. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. And now I'll turn it over to Benny Meshulam from the Attorney General's office. I'll stop sharing my screen. And I think, Kate, you can show his slides.
Great. Yeah, we'll get to those, I think, in a minute. But thank you, Larry. And good evening, everyone. My name is Benny Meshulam. I'm the Senior Advisor for Climate and Energy in the Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division, which is a newly renamed division in the Attorney General's office. ERA, which is what we call it for short. This is our name. Our name change better reflects our historical and ongoing role to advocate on behalf of all ratepayers in regulatory matters involving the price and delivery of electricity, but also natural gas, water, and telecommunication services. I just want to thank Larry for hosting us and to everyone for being here to listen to all the stakeholders about the problems that we've seen in this predatory competitive electric supply industry for years now. Our research continues to show that vulnerable residents across Massachusetts are on average losing money when they sign up with competitive electric suppliers. I think some context is important. So when the industry was restructured in 1997, residential customers were given the option of buying their supply portion, essentially the electricity itself, from either the basic service offering, which is sort of the default offering, something called municipal aggregation, or from competitive electric suppliers. These supply costs are separate from the distribution and transmission costs, which cover only the delivery of the electricity and are heavily regulated by entities, including the Department of Public Utilities. It's important for us to note in the AG's office that we are not calling for a ban on contracts between electric suppliers and utilities for the provision of basic service. We are not advocating for a ban of on contracts between electric suppliers and municipalities as part of municipal aggregation, which I know other folks will talk about. And we are not calling for an end to contracts between commercial and industrial customers and competitive electric suppliers. We are calling for an end to contracts between competitive electric suppliers and individual residential customers. We are talking about the competitive electric supply companies who many of you have probably seen in your neighborhoods going door to door, calling residents quite aggressively over and over, many times with false promises of savings on their utility bills, and often with false claims about environmental benefits, which are such a priority for so many of us. Many times we see these companies then turn around and charge residents, especially low-income residents, much more than their utility company would have charged for the same electric supply. Their actions are wrong, and oftentimes they skirt the law. For each of the last several years, and Kate, if you don't mind pulling up the first slide, our office, the Attorney General's office, has put together a report on the competitive electric supply industry. Our experts analyze the actual rates charged by the competitive suppliers and compare those rates to the applicable basic service, to the default rate from the customer's utility, to determine whether the consumers saved money or lost money on competitive supply. And in fact, our latest report will be released later this month. But you'll see here on this slide that we expect that the report will show that from July 2015 through June 2023, so over an 8-year period, Massachusetts competitive supply customers, residential customers, paid suppliers over $577 million more in aggregate than they would have paid on their utility basic service. This is money that ratepayers could have used to pay rent or put food on the table, or to make meaningful investments in the fight against climate change by insulating their home, for example, investing in air source heat pumps or installing EV chargers. Our studies have shown that despite fluctuations in the energy markets over the years, customers have experienced net losses in 7 out of the 8 years, with annual aggregate losses ranging from 65 million to over 100 million to 111 million, as you can see there on the left. In the last year of aggregate customer losses, the average household lost more than $200 per year, about $202, with the average low-income household losing approximately 11% more than the average household at $224 per year. In the 1 year that customers achieved aggregate savings, which you see on the left, a $30 million amount, a year in which the basic service rate was double the next highest basic service rate on record, we saw those $30 million savings, which are just a fraction of the net losses experienced in every other year that you see on the table there. If we can move on to the second slide, it's really important to note that even in this year of in that one anomalous year of savings, low-income ratepayers still accrued net losses as compared to what they would have paid for basic service. In the July 22 through June 23 year, the average household experienced net savings of $80, but the average low-income household still experienced net losses of $10, meaning that the spread between the two, between low-income households ended up paying and what the average customer paid was $90 over the course of a year. Moreover, despite these modest aggregate net savings in this 1 year, more households lost money than realized savings in the July 2022 to 2023 timeframe. The number of low-income households experiencing a net loss exceeded those experiencing a net gain by approximately 10,000 households per month. I just need to pause here for a moment to let someone out of the room. Hold on.
That's primetime television.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And now if we're all set with the slides. Thank you, Kate. The number of households enrolled with competitive electric suppliers continues to modestly decline, which is good. Our most recent numbers show that around 378,000 households received their electricity from competitive electric suppliers between July 2022 and June 2023. But our numbers still show that low-income residents are still nearly twice as likely to enroll with competitive electric suppliers, and that those low-income residents are paying higher rates than customers who are not low-income. We continue to see suppliers disproportionately enrolling residents in communities with higher concentrations of low-income families and residents of color in our gateway cities, like Springfield, Worcester, Fall River, and Lowell, as well as in the Boston communities of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. Conversely, communities with higher median incomes tend to have lower enrollment with competitive suppliers. This is quite simply a matter of economic security and of energy injustice. As part of our office's consumer protection efforts, our Consumer and Advocacy and Response Division, which is our intake hotline, works closely with consumers to resolve complaints about competitive electric suppliers through a voluntary mediation process. Since 2016, that division has received over 700 complaints against competitive electric suppliers. As part of this process, consumers detail their experiences with suppliers, with many of them describing deceptive sales representations and being blindsided by unexpectedly high rates, complaining that they never received notices of simple things like rate increases, or that if they do receive a notice, it's misleading. And they tell us that when they file a complaint with their supplier, they just get the runaround or just a flat denial of any relief. It's clear from these complaints that suppliers are not complying with the consumer protection laws that are already on the books. And those complaints also reveal that we are not just talking about one bad apple who can be sued into compliance. Rather, these complaints reveal to us that these kinds of tactics are a feature and not a bug for this industry. So when the industry insists that reform is the solution, we must remember that there is no reason and no evidence to think that they would comply with any new or enhanced regulations. Nor is there any evidence to show that these competitive electric suppliers provide any meaningful benefits to consumers in Massachusetts. Thus, it's really difficult for us to envision any scenario where additional regulation will transform the market from one that generally harms consumers to one that generally benefits them. Now, the number of complaints and money lost are one thing, but let's not forget about the human costs. These are people, these are customers who are disproportionately low income, customers of color, customers living in our environmental justice communities who have for too long been underserved and have borne too many burdens. It is egregious that we allow this industry to continue to harm and prey on people who are really struggling to pay for basic necessities like food, housing, and their utilities. And like I said earlier, it's not just a few bad actors, it is the entire industry that's costing Massachusetts residents on average hundreds of dollars more on their bills each year. We have been unable to identify a supplier that consistently provides savings on average to its customers year over year. Indeed, when customers do save money with a supplier, those savings are often small, especially in comparison to the significant losses that most consumers experience. And it is not unusual for a supplier to turn those savings into huge losses for their customers in future years. We have again seen, again and again, Massachusetts residents harmed by competitive electric suppliers, and these suppliers use deceptive marketing tactics that often violate our laws. They hide the fact that their products do not provide consumers with meaningful savings and, in fact, will very likely result in higher utility bills over time. I just want to thank everyone again, especially Larry and his team, for your time, and I look forward to continuing working with all of you over the coming weeks and months on this. Thank you so much.
Benny, thank you very much for the work your office does and for Attorney General Campbell's leadership on this. Our next speaker is Michael Judge, Undersecretary for Energy for the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Thank you, Michael. Go ahead.
Thanks, Larry. So I would just start, I think, by building on some of the comments that were made by Benny in the Attorney General's office, and first acknowledge that Governor Healy supports a ban on individual direct residential competitive supply sales, it's just as she did when she was Attorney General. But also that this is not a partisan issue. This was also supported by Governor Baker. This is something that I think has been seen as a problem for quite a while in Massachusetts. And building on the data that the Attorney General has collected, The Department of Public Utilities a couple of years ago collected some information as well through a slightly different methodology of analysis, but arrived at the exact same results and really corroborated what the Attorney General's findings were, and examined a few different items as well. The DPU, similar to the Attorney General's office, found that low-income customers were 63% more likely to be enrolled with competitive suppliers than other residential customers, and also found that those same low-income customers were charged supply rates that were on average 13% higher than non-low-income customers that were also on competitive supply. So not only are they more likely to be on competitive supply, they're more likely to be charged more than their counterparts, non-low-income counterparts that are on competitive supply as well. And I think one thing that's really important to note about all of that is that when customers that are on low-income discount rates are charged supply rates that are above basic service, all distribution customers pay more. So even customers that are not enrolled in competitive supply are being harmed by the practices of this industry, because when a low-income customer is ripped off by a competitive supplier, all other customers end up paying more in distribution rates as a result. And there's a measurable impact from that. And then additionally, DPU was examining this in the context of customer arrearages and trying to determine whether customers that were on competitive supply were more likely to be behind in their bills, and found that customers on competitive supply were 20% more likely to be in arrears than customers that weren't, and that non-low-income customers saw debts that they had accrued that were 47% greater than their counterparts who were not on competitive supply, and low-income customers saw debts that were 73% greater. And again, because suppliers do not face any consequences when they do not collect bills because of the way that state law works, they are actually they do not they're made whole when a customer does not pay and the utility has to carry that debt. That also leads to an increase in ratepayer costs and distribution costs that are passed on to all customers. So again, low-income and non-low-income customers paying more results in higher costs for distribution customers across the board. Another thing I want to touch on too is just the challenges in overseeing and regulating this industry. A lot of people will make the claim that, well, can't you just regulate it better? Why are we giving up without trying to impose additional regulations and try to put more standards in place? And I think having direct experience investigating these companies when I was at the Department of Public Utilities, I can say that any company that is in this space, that is particularly those that are engaging in telemarketing and door-to-door marketing, are committing consumer protection violations on a daily basis, and that it is nearly impossible to actually track these violations down. It's very challenging to build a record against these companies. They often provide inaccurate information or doctored information. There's evidence on record at the Department of Public Utilities of them providing doctored phone calls. So telemarketing calls that are resulting from a customer complaint that are provided to the department, they're edited versions of the calls. So it makes it extremely difficult for the DPU to exercise its oversight authority, even when it's trying to act on actionable complaints that consumers provide. This is really an industry that's built on deceiving and lying customers about the products that they are selling them and overcharging those customers over time. And the evidence is voluminous, showing that is the case. And it's not just Massachusetts, it's across many jurisdictions. And I think there's really, we've come to the conclusion that there's really no way to properly regulate this industry. And really the best option for consumers at large is for us to ban this practice altogether.
Thank you very much, Mike. So now our next speaker is Reverend Mariama White Hammond. She's the Chief of Energy and Environment for the City of Boston. She's been a great municipal leader on this issue, along with her boss, Mayor Wu. So, Reverend.
Thank you. So thank you for making the time to be here. As was said, I serve in this role because the mayor has a clear commitment to serving the residents of Boston, and that's my job in this role. But I also want to name that I'm here because I'm a Boston resident. I live in the zip code of 02125, which is one of the most targeted zip codes in the city by competitive electric suppliers. And I know that we're targeted because we are the third most diverse zip code in America. We have folks from all over the world. We have many different racial groups. We have a lot of folks who don't speak English as their first language. We have a lot of seniors. It's an amazing community and a community that I love to live in. But because of all those things, which are an amazing blessing, we are also challenged by being targeted by an industry that unfortunately seeks out those who can least afford to pay extra. In my role, so I want to just note that those folks have come to my door. In 2019, I personally opened the door and was given the spiel of a young woman who probably was only saying what she had been taught. I have no reason to believe she was aware that what she was saying was untrue, but she was telling me all these things about how the rates were about to go up and she could save me money by giving me this rate. Now, by that point, I knew something about this. It actually wasn't the first time they came to my door also, I think again in 2017, I believe, but I was able to push back. But only, let's see, I think it was November of 2021, my husband was approached again. And he called because in this instance, they said that they were there on behalf of the city of Boston. And he was surprised because obviously he asked them if they knew who I was and they didn't seem to know anything. Now it's worth noting that we have 6.5 members of our energy team. So the notion that they would be coming on behalf of the city of Boston and not have any idea who I was seemed a little odd to him. But the reality is, it's not just me and my neighbors, it's my parents, members of my congregation. All of them have been approached. And many of them are in those classes. They are low income, they are people of color. My parents are seniors, but some of them aren't. The reality is that many, many different people fall victim to these predatory practices. And so I want to lift up the fact that we, as the city of Boston, have tried to support our residents by reporting the abuses. You will hear the line by the industry that this is just a few bad apples and all we need is better regulation. And so for the last 6 years, the city of Boston has been working directly with the AG's office to report these abuses. As soon as we hear something, we make a call, we make sure that people are connected to the Attorney General so that they can share their story and that the Attorney General can do their best to report. But the reality is that even with all of these reports, they require extensive investigations. And by the time those reports go through, sometimes those very same people have been approached multiple times by other competitive electric suppliers. And what we've experienced is that tighter regulation does not seem to lead to any kind of transformative change. We also try to support people by bringing them a better option. The city of Boston has one of the stronger community choice electricity programs where we have worked together to aggregate and buy better and cheaper and cleaner energy on behalf of our residents. We've done massive campaigns to make sure that we are letting people know that less expensive option is available to them. And we want to celebrate the ways that we've been able to grow that program, and many more people have been involved. However, we still have not been able to completely turn the tide on the growth of competitive electric suppliers. And probably most disheartening is how much those competitive electric suppliers have continued to target the people who can least afford to pay better and to pay more. And so having already tried to report the abuses, having already tried to give people a better option, the reality is that we cannot compete with an industry that continues to make lots of money through these abusive practices. When the largest city in the Commonwealth, we probably have the largest energy team of any city in the Commonwealth cannot stem the tide of predatory electric suppliers, I'm not sure who can. And so we're here to be honest about the fact that we've done our best and we don't believe that we can make a difference without a ban. But I also want to lift this up because I know there are many other smaller cities and towns that are also experiencing this. I've talked to residents and municipal leaders in Lynn. I've talked to folks from Springfield and New Bedford and many other parts of the Commonwealth that are seeing this at the same rate that we are, and sometimes even worse. Many of them don't have sustainability teams or a whole environment department to take this on. And so we believe that at this point, I am fine with competitive electric suppliers continuing to compete for our contracts as the city of Boston, contracts with our larger building owners. It is no problem. I have no problem with them approaching people who have the skills and resources to negotiate those contracts. I think that's exactly where it makes sense. However, I know the average homeowner and resident clearly does not have the resources to compare these products, and they often don't know what to do when their introductory rate suddenly jumps to a price they cannot afford. And so I am here and I want to make a note. How often do you see the Attorney General's office, the administration for the Commonwealth, and local municipal leaders, along with advocates and the legal community, standing up together, united around something? Each of us has been driven to this point because we have seen with our own eyes the people who are directly impacted by this. And at a time with inflation still continuing to be a challenge for many people, with many of our residents struggling to choose between food and fuel, utilities and rent, we believe that now is a time more than ever to crack down on these companies that, quite frankly, do not seem to have any other model but the predatory one that they've been using. They've had more than enough years. We've been sounding the alarm. They had many opportunities to change their practices, and unfortunately, they have not chosen to do so. So if you are on here and you're a resident of the city of Boston, we would welcome you to join us in our aggregation. You can go and learn a little bit more about this at boston.gov/BCCE. We do have a program that is intended to give you the best price we absolutely can and make sure that you have access to green energy. But it's not enough for us just to offer the alternative. It is our responsibility, our sacred duty to stand up on behalf of our residents and say, no more. And so that's why we are joining in coalition with all of the other folks that you've already heard. We are really thankful to have such a strong group of people who are uniting together to lift this up. And we believe that now is a time for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend, for your power and clarity with those remarks. Appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce Jeremiah Battle, who is the senior attorney for the National Consumer Law Center, which is a great organization that works on a lot of consumer issues affecting all people, particularly low-income people around the country, but they have a lot of expertise in the area of energy. So welcome, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank to all the speakers. Reverend, it's very, very difficult to follow, but I will do my best. She speaks with such power and conviction. Just to make it clear, the National Consumer Law Center works on behalf of 4 individuals, consumers across the entire country. And we've seen the problems raised here in Massachusetts or all over the country with respect to this issue. This is a very serious consumer problem, both in Massachusetts and nationally, for all the reasons that all the speakers have already outlined. These agreements are fraught with deceptive sales practices. You get the low teaser rates, and then a few minutes later, the price is jacked up to something that's unaffordable. And the false promises of lower prices. Deregulation that happened back in the 1990s promised, under the guise of lowering prices. It's done anything but that. It's been, quite frankly, a disaster for poor people in Massachusetts. These contracts are overpriced, grossly overpriced. Many studies have shown, and the Attorney General already mentioned this, that consumers pay more to competitive suppliers than they would have paid for standard offer for the standard service. In a nutshell, these agreements provide no benefit to consumers. Let me say that again. They provide no benefit to consumers. Secondly, these competitive supply contracts have led to inflated electricity prices in Massachusetts. 1/4 of consumers report they're having problems paying their electric bills because of inflation today. And the higher prices that are associated with these contracts just increases the burden on struggling families, causing them to have utility arrearages and choose between rent and utilities, medicine and utilities, food and utilities. These contracts also undermine utility affordability programs. Taxpayers and ratepayers pay a nice amount of money to have programs that are going to help people in need. And the affordable programs that are existing right now are being diverted, and this money is just going right into the pockets of competitive suppliers. Third, competitive supplier undermines our state climate goals. It's going to be hard to convince someone to electrify and to switch from gas to electricity if they already have an unaffordable electric bill. And so it undermines all those efforts. One of the other things I want to back up and just mention is the fact that that's really heinous with these type of contracts is the targeting of low-income communities, LEP communities, and the elders. These are communities that can at least afford to pay higher prices. And it doesn't just happen in Boston. I live on the South Shore in Abington, but my wife shops a lot of times in Brockton. And she was approached by a competitive supplier at a CVS store who was very shrewd, who talked to her and tried to find something in common with her. Oh, you're from South Carolina? I'm from South Carolina. And talked to her about the bill. I said, wait a minute, what did this guy say? I said, oh, no, that's a competitive supplier. He was trying to switch us from our current provider to something that would have been very unaffordable. We switched. I immediately called our provider and got on the do not switch list. And I saw them, the same competitive suppliers coming in my neighborhood last year, going house by house. I was hoping that they would come to my house, but they must have had a list of do not go there, and they skipped over and went to someone else. I wondered about other folks here, even on the South Shore, who may have been taken advantage of by someone in that circumstance. And so, in essence, just to kind of wrap it up, competitive market for energy supply for retailers is simply not working for residential customers. It's just not working. It has not worked. It's not going to work. Consumers end up paying more for the same electric service. And just to rebut the argument that, well, we can regulate our way out of this, even in states with strong consumer protections, like Massachusetts has a strong 93 code, Maryland, New York, and Illinois, even in those states with strong protections, they have not been able to stop overcharges and abusive marketing. So therefore, we support efforts to just get rid of this industry. It's not going to work. It has not worked. It will not work. And so we cannot overstress as we've seen this across the country. And now is the time to step for Massachusetts, to step forward and to help people who have been fleeced with predatory mortgages and fleeced with all other type of discriminatory products for years and generations. Now is the time to stop this type of this type of company from continuing to fleece poor people in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Jerry, thank you very much for bringing that experience to the table. Our next speakers will be from Green Roots, which is a outstanding environmental justice organization. And first, I'll turn it over to Devin McCoy, and he will introduce Patricia Ospina.
Thanks so much, Larry. It's great to be here today. My name is Devin McGoy. I am a community organizer at Green Roots. We're an environmental justice community-based organization working in Chelsea and East Boston. And I, in particular, focus on energy democracy issues, which we define as the idea that environmental justice communities, particularly, communities of color, low-income communities, and immigrant communities, should be able to help shape and financially benefit from the clean energy transition and ideally control clean energy assets and make them work for these communities that have only ever experienced extraction from our current energy system. This issue of competitive electric suppliers is one of the most tangible day-to-day issues that environmental justice communities face, and one of the heaviest or one of the highest or biggest reasons for the disproportionate energy burden in environmental justice communities. As I said, the competitive electric supply industry is just one other heinous example of how environmental justice communities are experiencing extreme wealth extraction due to our current energy system. So I'm here today with my friend, East Boston resident, and deeply involved Green Roots member, Patricia Ospina, who is very generous and has offered to share some of her experience with these competitive electric suppliers. Patricia is going to speak in Spanish. I will translate. I'm not a professional interpreter, but I'm going to do my best. So, Patricia,
Thank you.
puedes seguir con tu testimonio.
Okay. Yo quería hablar sobre dos hombres que vinieron, uno hablaba español, el otro inglés. Hablaron con don Julio, el encargado del apartamento. Hablaron sobre la luz y cuánto era el bill y cuánto vivíamos, si todo era de gas o era de luz o qué era de luz. Todo lo informaron, todo lo anotaron. Luego vinieron al otro día a decir que algo se les había olvidado, porque era mejor que él diera el número de cuenta para ellos sacar el dinero del banco y ellos le iban a mandar un recibo para que hablara con nosotros y nosotros pagáramos el poquito que íbamos a pagar. Pero empezó el mes, terminó el mes y no llegó el bill. Entonces nos preguntábamos por qué no llegaba el bill. Y don Julio me contó esta historia, yo no lo sabía y entonces ya me di cuenta que fue que nos hicieron una estafa, nos robaron. Entonces él fue al banco y ya le habían sacado $350.
Okay. So Patricia was telling us about a time a little while back when two people came to her door. One spoke English, one spoke Spanish, and they spoke with the main tenant responsible for their unit, whose name is Don Julio. And they asked him about the bill, how many people were living in the apartment, if they used gas as well, and they wrote all of this down. They came back the next day and said that they had forgotten something. They asked for the account number, they asked for his bank account information, and said that they would simply charge him his lower electric rate directly out of his debit card account, and that he would get a receipt in the mail. But after a long time, a couple months, no bills, no receipts had arrived. And he told Patricia all of this, who informed him that this seemed like clearly a scam, but by then it was already too late, and $350 had already been taken out of his account without his knowledge.
Y él tuvo que cancelar la cuenta y darle otro número de cuenta porque ellos ya quedaban con ese número de cuenta y no quería que le siguieran sacando.
So he had
Pero
to cancel his bank account, and in order to avoid more money being taken out.
sí.
¿Quieres contar un poco sobre cómo resolvimos el asunto?
Sí, yo apliqué con usted me ayudó para aplicar para que nos llegara un bill que nos llegaba un poco alto, ya estamos cómodos con el pago y estamos bien con el pago que estamos haciendo ahora,
So,
porque usted nos ayudó, perdón.
yeah. No, gracias, Patricia. So she said that she spoke with me after a little while after this had happened, and I helped her apply for the city's program, Boston Community Choice Electricity, which has been really great for her household. It saved them a lot of money.
Sí, algo más.
No, I think that's it.
Sí.
Gracias.
Gracias, Patricia.
And thank you. You're welcome.
Devin, do you want to just take a minute and you know of another case we talked about earlier, Noemi's? Do you want to briefly recap that story?
Yeah, so my colleague Noemi, another East Boston resident and an organizer on staff at Green Roots, was in a very similar situation to Patricia, in which folks arrived at her door. She had recently moved to East Boston and was unaware of how all the energy system worked. She had never even been in EverSource territory before, so she wasn't quite sure how things worked. These people claimed to be coming from the city, offering her a program to help her save money on her bills. So she showed them her bill, and they signed her up for this program without explaining what it was really all about. And so she noticed just a couple months later that her bill had nearly doubled, which put her in a significant like personal budgetary crisis because she had to pay the rent, she had to feed her kids, and she had to start limiting some of her other expenses so that she could just make her electric bill. At one point, she was paying, and I saw this bill, 27 cents per kilowatt hour, while the city of Boston's program was, I believe, around 10 or 11 cents at that time. So I helped her get off of this, just like with Patricia. I helped her enroll in Boston Community Choice Electricity, which she simply hadn't heard of. It's as the Reverend was saying, it's just really hard to stem the tide of these programs, no matter how much outreach is coming from the city and from independent organizations like ours. And Noemi was in this situation for approximately 5 years. And after she got off of it, she immediately noticed a significant savings on her bill. So it's just yet another example of how these companies take advantage of people who have limited English proficiency, people who are immigrants, people who live in low-income neighborhoods, and it's simply unacceptable that we allow this to continue to happen.
Thank you, Devin. Appreciate it. I'm going to now share my screen for a couple more slides. We're getting to the home stretch here for the presentations. So we've discussed the problem. I think our speakers did a fabulous job explaining what the problem really is, but there's a solution, and it's a bill in the legislature, Senate Bill 2106, an act relative to electric ratepayer protection. It's sponsored by Senator Brendan Creighton, Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and State Senator Sal DiDomenico. There was also an identical bill filed in the House by Representative Moran. However, the Senate bill seems to be getting further along in the legislative process. And this year, we're expecting this bill to be part of maybe a larger climate bill that will be developed between the House and the Senate in a sort of a conference committee. And we're hoping that this language prevails. And it'll probably take a couple of months until the end of July when the legislative session ends. So what we're looking for is for people to understand the importance of passing this bill, which says that energy suppliers should no longer execute new contracts for generation services with individual residential retail customers. And it's only targeted towards the market for individual residential retail customers. It does not affect in any way the activities of municipal aggregation plans, which is more of a community-wide program that we've talked about tonight. It also doesn't affect the ability of a business, large commercial or small commercial or industrial business from contracting with an electricity supplier. So the abuses that we've talked about have been visited upon residential consumers, and this would just change that. So we still want the electricity suppliers to compete in Massachusetts, but to do so for municipal aggregation, to do so for commercial and industrial customers, and they also are the suppliers who end up serving basic service. So this is the bill that we're referring to. You can take action. You can contact your legislator. We will email these slides out to you so you can have the links. You can ask them to support Senate 2106, and you can learn more about the issue by looking at the Attorney General's report. And recently, Mayor Wu of Boston and Attorney General Campbell co-authored a letter to the Globe. It's called an op-ed that further explained all the issues here, and we encourage you to read up on that. And if you are with an organization and you'd like to add your name, the organization name to a sign-on letter, please contact Carrie Catan, who works with us at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. She'll be looking for your email, and we'll add you to a list of supporters of this. We need individuals to contact legislators, and then we'll do the sign-on letter for organizations. And you can learn more about this whole topic at a website that we set up. You'll see that link. We will email out the slide and the recording and a few other resources. And if you have any questions that we can't answer tonight, email Carrie at greenenergyconsumers.org. Now it's 7:49, so I'm going to take some questions in the Q&A box, and I will either assign them. I might assign them to somebody else. Chris asked, the idea of savings seems great, and he had a great experience with one. Is it possible to administer supply choice so benefits are realized without disadvantages? I will turn that back over to the Attorney General's office or to Michael Judge.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I mean, I think are there some people that have saved money? Yes. But I think if you look at the Attorney General's report, it's the last one, I believe, last report that came out said that over 80% of all customers that are on competitive supply were losing money. So it's the vast majority of customers that are losing money. And are there certain regulatory reforms that could be enacted that could improve the process? Yes, I think that's also true. However, it's not going to root out the problem. In other jurisdictions where they have made significant reforms, a lot of these marketing issues still persist. The suppliers are still overcharging consumers on average relative to the default rates that they would have paid otherwise. We've just seen that on the whole, there's really no amount of additional regulation that would seemingly curb all of the abuses and address the issues that we see here, where customers are being overcharged and deceived and lied to in the marketing of these products.
Thank you, Michael. Benny, would you like to take that on at all?
I don't know. Is Benny on still?
Perhaps not. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think he would be in concurrence, essentially.
Yes,
I think this issue.
So. I suspect.
The big one is that the studies have been done indicating the vast majority of consumers lose, and on net, that's why it's over $500 million over several years. And so, yeah, there'll be someone who seems to figure out how to benefit from this, but.
And I think another thing that I just note on that is, I think the differences between the amount of savings and the amount of losses, I think it's, yes, some customers are saving, but the savings are generally very small relative to customers that have experienced a net loss relative to what they would have otherwise paid. In those cases, sometimes those customers are overpaying by orders of magnitude. It's very, very significant additional cost.
Yep, thank you. Next question. Nick asked, competitive suppliers seem to, on average, cause consumers to lose money compared to basic service. He asked, how does that compare with community aggregation? And do community aggregation customers save residents money on aggregate or not? So on that one, we'll refer you to two studies, Nick. We did one that's on our website, greenenergyconsumers.org/aggregation. We looked at the fact that most communities that have aggregations where they add renewable energy above and beyond what's required by state law actually saved a substantial amount of money over the last several years. And that those who didn't add additional renewable energy saved as well. The UMass Amherst did a study of that type. And so aggregation has actually saved people money compared to basic service. And as we've just identified, basic service saves a lot of money compared to individuals who go on with retail suppliers. So, and all community aggregations are generally in Massachusetts are doing quite well. That's why we're trying to encourage communities that haven't done that to do so. And then he asked, would this affect community solar programs? And the legislation would not. Michael, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can just add, community solar is not regulated the same way. Community solar providers are not competitive retail suppliers. So they're not licensed the same way, and they're not regulated under the same rules. So they would be able to continue marketing to residents. And there may be additional options available to community solar customers soon too, other than some of the traditional methods that have been used to date. So no, this would not affect community solar.
I got an email earlier, a gentleman who just asked a good question. I just want to make it very clear, folks. All we're talking about tonight, if you look on your electricity bill, is the electricity supply portion of your bill. The person was asking, does it affect the distribution or delivery charge on bills? And that's really not what we're talking about here tonight. And so I wanted to make that clear. That was a good question. Couple more questions. Somebody put into the Q&A a link to the City of Boston's Community Choice Electricity. You can find that. If you're in a community and you don't know if your community has an aggregation program, if you go to our website, aggregation, we have a lookup. You can find your community, and then we can turn you to where you need to go for that. This person, Pat, says on EnergySwitchMassachusetts.gov, probably a good question for Michael. Their committee has been sending people to that for research. How does that work? What do you think of that website? Pat says we also encourage them to participate in the municipal aggregation contract.
Yeah, EnergySwitchMass.gov is a great website. I mean, it's the best tool that if a consumer is going to participate in this, that's the way they should do it. But it's still there. I mean, the drawback is still that you enter into these initial offers that are posted on that website, and if you're not careful, at the end of that term, you'll switch over to a variable rate contract, and all the savings that you may have generated from entering into a supply contract could be erased immediately and within 1 month. So, Energy Switch Mass is a tool developed by the state to assist consumers. It is, we encourage people to use it if they're going to participate in this space. But it does, that there are still the drawbacks of how these suppliers operate in these longer term contracts, where at the end of that term, the variable rate will apply in almost all cases and the price will go up. So I think,
Undersecretary,
yeah.
I just want to confirm something, because I think we had a similar question recently. The state creates that website so that people have to be transparent.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that everyone that is on that website, there are competitive electric suppliers on that website. So that's what people ask me as a clarifying question. Yeah. Yes, it is one more attempt by the state to make sure that you have the right information about what is happening. But it doesn't change the fact that you might sign up with an introductory rate, and 6 months later, you might have a totally different rate. So unless you have the ability to really pay attention and watch the market. So for instance, my director of the energy team actually does have a competitive electric supplier. He uses it in part to see what they're doing and how things are moving so that we have some awareness. He also is a lawyer with 30 plus years in the energy market. If you're that kind of person, you actually might be able to have some savings. But the question is, and I think he would concur, is it right for a small number of people who know how to play this game to benefit while the large majority of people are losing? And I think at the end of the day, our responsibility is to protect residents. And I will also say this, I don't know if we want to be a state where we allow the kind of companies that are completely unscrupulous in this way to continue to exist. People will suggest, okay, well, let's just protect low income people. But are we saying it's okay if middle income or high income people are fleeced? So I want to be able to say, yes, it is terrible what they do to low income people, and we want it to stop. But I don't want to say, so go out and do the same thing to other people. If there aren't real savings, if there isn't a real green benefit, then we shouldn't allow them to continue to operate in our state.
Let me just add one thing on that point, if I can.
Yep.
What she just said is just excellent. Fleecing of any consumer is wrong. And you shouldn't be allowed to fleece anyone, middle class, upper middle class, anyone. Fleecing is fleecing. That's anti-competition. If you think about it, it's un-American. If we believe in competition, it's supposed to be fair, it's supposed to be transparent, not unscrupulous.
The last thing I'd just say about the website too is that it is the best tool we have up there right now, but it is there's a very low percentage of customers that enroll through that website relative to the other marketing channels. Most the suppliers rely on door-to-door telemarketing and mailers to enroll most customers. They do not get they generally speaking do not get a large volume of customers through the website.
I'll just add a personal, over a 2-week period, I got 4 letters in the mail from the same supplier. And in it was an introductory rate. If you read the fine print, it was only good for 3 months, and then it was subject to their change. And that matched up with which was on Energy Switch website, which is fine for 3 months. But Energy Switch would not be able to know if that supplier changed my rate. It can't follow that. So that is a concern. So I want to wrap up with a couple of quick things. Stephanie has a question about asking if a particular supplier named Arbor Energy will follow through on their promise to switch over to better rates over time. I don't think anybody on this call is able to know about Arbor in detail. I'd recommend that you look for alternatives, and if you find a better one, that you talk to Arbor. And if you have any issues there, contact the Department of Public Utilities or the Attorney General's office to support you in that. You could also email us if you have a question. Not that I can promise that we'll be able to get you through the issue, but we'll try. I want to put into the chat, Kate, if you could, another issue that we see is greenwashing. A lot of the suppliers are looking to sign people up who are concerned about adding more renewable energy to the grid. And in Massachusetts, policymakers and my organization are pretty devoted to the concept that renewable energy should meet a certain standard. We call it Class 1 in Massachusetts. And so in the chat, we go through explaining what Class 1 renewable energy is all about and what suppliers tend to be offering. So recently, the Department of Energy Resources testified to the legislature that less than 0.5% of renewable energy certificates that were provided to consumers through competitive suppliers were coming from Class 1 resources. And almost all of them were from municipal aggregation. So the aggregations are as transparent as can be. It's on their website. It's vetted by the city and town. It's approved by the Department of Public Utilities. And so if that's a concern, people should be looking for that. So just please, if you want to learn more, you can find that in the chat. So I guess we've got just a couple more questions. Nick has a comment, an observation. To support electrification, low electricity costs are a necessity for everyone. because there will be substantial cost to electrify. And what he's talking about, which I agree with, is we want people to switch from fossil fuels to electric cars, and we want to switch to heat pumps. And so the last we need at any income level is higher costs for electricity for any reason. That would be a disincentive to otherwise electrify. And I think we all agree on this call. That is how we get to our climate goals in Massachusetts, which is to try to make electricity affordable, so it makes switching to building and transportation to electricity. And so that's a great point right there. And with that, I think we're done with questions, and just want to reiterate, folks, a saying we have is that advocacy and public policy is not a spectator sport. I want to reiterate the fact that Massachusetts is going to be dealing with this climate legislation between now and the end of July. The House and the Senate will be working. The governor's office will be interacting with the legislators. And so we're encouraging people to look at, there are other issues in the climate bill that you might be interested in, but this one here is a big one for environmental justice. And so we ask you to contact your legislators and to speak out in favor of Senate Bill 2106. So thank you, everybody who presented. I think you did a fabulous job. If I wasn't so biased in favor of 2106, I would be now. And I wish everyone a good night.